better strap yourself in. It's time for the Howie Carr Show.
I'm telling you, we know this is not millions of people, but what we're talking about are things like, if you look at the Milwaukee Police report that came out about 6 years ago. The Milwaukee Police Department put out a 70-page report on election fraud in Milwaukee. This wasn't the Republican Party putting out the report. What I'm telling you is that this is real. So let's not go down this road where we're acting like this is some figment of people's imagination.
But I think
Live from an undisclosed location.
We are behind. She has some advantages, like $66 million in ad buys just in the month of September, thereby doubling her ad buys from August. Most of those ads are negative against Donald Trump, classic politics of personal destruction, cesspool kind of ads. And she has tremendous advantages. She has a former president, that happens to be her husband, campaigning for her, the current president and first lady, vice president, all much more popular than she can hope to be. But she's seen as the incumbent.
Unchained and unstoppable.
it's been a season of surprises. We like what we see now. We like the early voting activity and the absentee ballot requests coming in other states, but we are not taking anything for granted. We're going to hammer to do everything we can before the polls close the evening of November 8th.
Who's your captain? Howie Carr.
I am asking the American people to dream big once again. What follows is my 100-day action plan to make America great again. It's a contract between Donald J. Trump and the American voter, and it begins with bringing honesty, accountability, and change to Washington, D.C.
Rump swabs, hacks, and moonbats beware. It's Howie Carr.
Welcome to the Howie Carr Show. Today, it's 2 weeks out from the election. 2 weeks from tomorrow is the election. After all this time, early voting is starting in various states, including Florida and Massachusetts today, and we'll be talking about it. And it's a heated campaign. I don't care what the polls say. You know, they always talk about coincidences. Funny coincidences. I just want to run over a list, go down a list here of some of the funny coincidences. There's always a lot of violence at Trump rallies, or so we are told, by Clinton operatives. But it's just a coincidence that the DNC operatives we now know from WikiLeaks are on tape. On tape from James O'Keefe, I should say, not the WikiLeaks, from James O'Keefe, plotting to foment violence at the Trump rallies. The DNC gave Bernie Sanders a fair shake, but it's just a coincidence the DNC officials emailed back and forth endlessly about undermining his campaign and helping Hillary, even if they had to make anti-Semitic slurs to undercut his electoral base in some of the primary states. CNN, the Clinton News Network, isn't really the Clinton News Network. That's terribly unfair to call them the Clinton News Network because they're fair and impartial. It's just a coincidence. It's a funny coincidence that the CNN analyst, Donna Brazile, gave Hillary Clinton campaign questions ahead of a town hall debate. Just a funny coincidence. CNBC's John Harwood, he's a legitimate journalist, of course. It's just a coincidence that he bragged to John Podesta about wanting to take down Trump. Then you have that guy Mark Leibovich, he works for the New York Times. It's just a funny coincidence that he gave the Hillary campaign the right to edit and cut out any of the quotes he was going to use in his story, because he does that with all the journalists. Funny there aren't any emails of him offering to let Donald Trump see any of the quotes that he was planning to use in any stories about Donald Trump, but it's just a funny coincidence that they happen to find these emails where he's giving Hillary Clinton the right to do this. And it's just a funny coincidence too, because Politico is totally on the level. It's one of the great groundbreaking media outlets that's come along in the last 15 or 20 years. And the fact that we now have not one, but two so-called journalists from Politico who are writing to John Podesta, the campaign chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign, to okay all their quotes, too. They're totally on the level. And they would do that also for the Trump campaign.
That's just what reporting is, Howie. You don't understand.
Okay, bro, I guess times have changed. I was always told that was the one thing you could never do, was to let anybody read the story before you published it. It just wasn't allowed. I mean, it was not good form to let anybody read the quotes before you put them into the paper. If they wanted to read the papers, they could go down. It's like Whitey and those guys. They used to go down and get the papers at midnight. That was what they did. And then now they would just go online at midnight and read the quotes. But you don't let any. Well, of course, I'm old-fashioned though, aren't I? I'm not one of the beautiful people of Politico or CNBC. You know what another funny coincidence is? Russia gave a major gift to the Clinton Foundation at around the same time that the uranium mining rights were being sold to a Russian-linked company, and allowed Russia, which, despite its great mineral wealth, has a shortage of natural deposits of uranium. So now they control 1/5 of American uranium supplies, which they can then turn around and sell to Iran, which likes to begin all of its parliament meetings not with a national anthem to Iran, but with a chant of death to America. It's just a funny coincidence that now Iran has this access to American uranium, and the Clinton Foundation has received millions and millions of dollars. Just like it's a funny coincidence that the King of Morocco decided to give $12 million to the Clinton Foundation after a bunch of emails appeared saying that Hillary Clinton would show up at a big confab that was being planned by said King of Morocco. And that Uma Abadan wrote emails to John Podesta, the campaign chairman, saying this is all Hillary's own mess that she made. A mess. $12 million. I'd like to be in a mess like that, wouldn't you? Of course, I'm not the Secretary of State, and neither are you. Just a funny coincidence that Hillary Clinton and the State Department would get a subpoena from a congressional committee telling them to preserve all of the emails that she had sent back and forth from a private server while she was Secretary of State. And then a few weeks later, with the subpoena in hand, meaning you're going to be punished if you don't do what we tell you to do, she would decide to delete 33,000 emails. 33,000 emails. It's just a funny coincidence that this morning in the Wall Street Journal, there was a story about how Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, a former bagman for the Clintons, the guy who lent them close to $1 million in 2001 or 2000 so they could buy their mansion in Chappaqua, New York, when Hillary was planning to run for the Senate, that Terry McAuliffe, who's now the governor of Virginia, would suddenly decide that his campaign committees would contribute $500,000 to a state Senate race in Northern Virginia. Believe it or not, a state Senate race in Northern Virginia. And the woman who was running just happened to be a physician who was married to the number 2 guy in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The same Federal Bureau of Investigation, which by an incredibly funny coincidence just happened to decide that there were no criminal offenses committed by Hillary Clinton in the email server scandal, despite the fact that in the email server scandal and the deleted emails, in spite of the fact that people have gone to jail for much less. People have gone to jail for a year in some cases for taking 5 6 photographs in secure areas, and she deleted 30,000 plus emails, and there are no criminal offenses charged. It's just a funny coincidence. Bill Clinton, he was making good money as a former president, millions upon millions of dollars a year. But in yet another funny coincidence, his speaking fees went through the roof once Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State and could sign off on things like that uranium deal with Russia that I just mentioned earlier. That's just a funny coincidence. The IT guy who set up a Clinton server, Brian Palliano, it's just a funny coincidence that he took the Fifth Amendment. That's everyone's right to take the Fifth Amendment. You don't have to incriminate yourself. The founding fathers insisted on that, and God knows Hillary Clinton believes in the Bill of Rights. We all know that, especially the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. And it's funny, too, isn't it, that Palliano and 3 of other Hillary's top aides got immunity from prosecution. Immunity from prosecution. That means they could testify, but as long as they told the truth, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, they weren't going to be prosecuted for anything they said. One of the people who got immunity was Cheryl Mills, her top aide. And then Cheryl Mills turned around and claimed she was a lawyer for Hillary Clinton. So she had attorney-client privilege on top of her grant of immunity. So she got kind of a double inoculation from criminal prosecution, you might say. It's a booster shot if you were a kid and you were going to the pediatrician. That's what you'd call it. And then on top of the double shot of immunity that she got, the FBI agreed to destroy her laptop just in case there was any other incriminating evidence on it. It's just a funny coincidence, though. That was just a funny coincidence. And then you know what a really funny coincidence was? Bill Clinton was flying on his private jet from the Clinton Foundation, and he was flying into Phoenix. And guess who else was on the tarmac that day? The Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, who was going to make the ultimate decision on whether or not a grand jury should be impaneled to hear evidence and soon thereafter indict Hillary Clinton for all kinds of obstruction and conspiracy. And Bill Clinton, in a funny coincidence, when he found his plane in the same airport as Loretta Lynch's, they decided to have a little meeting on the tarmac, just like he used to have a haircut when he was flying out of LAX when he was the president of the United States back in the 1990s. And then in the ultimate funny coincidence, the FBI declined to impanel the grand jury or even present any evidence to even present any evidence to a grand jury that they might or might not have impaneled that might have indicted Hillary Clinton and destroyed her campaign for president. And the same FBI whose number 2 guy had a wife who got $500,000 from Hillary's bag man. Funny coincidences, one and all, aren't they? 1-844-500-4242. By the way, if you want to get on the chump line, Grace is going to be tied up a little later in the afternoon, so now's your last chance to get in on the chump line. Go to 1-844-500-4242. Press 2 for the chump line, and it may not be too late to get on to the chump line. I'm Howie Carr.
That's right, Howie Carr.